Alright, so this is going to be the first episode in the BoneShatter Jug series. We're going to be essentially taking a character, bringing it from a very weak state that we can see here, and bringing that all the way to endgame. Endgame being 4 Void Stones, as well as tier 16 mapping, which is extremely good, especially for a cheap character. The goal on this is to spend no more than a couple exalts, hopefully. Maybe a few upgrades here and there, but for the most part, again, it should be pretty cheap, especially when starting out. The gear we're currently rocking is just some hacked gear that I bought from some vendors, threw an alchemy orb or an orb of binding, and called it a day. The only thing that's been bought so far is a Pillar of the Caged God, and that was for 3C. That's for a 5 link. If you want to buy something unlinked and link it yourself to get a 5 link, that's totally fine. As you can see by our defenses, we have a lot of armor, but our fire res is uncapped. So in terms of gear upgrades, we have a lot to do. In order to get this new gear, we're going to be farming a bit of heist, which has already been done a bit on this character, and I'm going to showcase some footage in a bit. And that's just very low level contracts. I'm talking level 60s or so. I tried a level 83 as in trading for 1C, and it was definitely very difficult. But that kind of makes sense because it's also a level 67 character, so we have quite a bit of time to grow, which is totally fine. The idea here is just to get a couple of C, and we ended up making around 30 to 40 or C or so, doing about 10 to 12 contracts or so not too many. And that's going to essentially bankroll some of our early upgrades. And I'm talking like maybe a C or 2 per ring, or trying to get maybe a helmet for like 2 to 3C. We'll have to see how the market is, but I'm going to try to make reasonable purchases though. So that way I'm not sniping anything for like an extremely low price and then saying that, oh, it's really easy to upgrade, etc. That I just got lucky. So we're going to be keeping it in that realm and then upgrading it over time, and then proceed to move into mapping after our heisting is done. So without further ado, I'm going to go and get into some mapping gameplay of what a contract will look like if you're playing something like this character. Alright, so here's an example of a heist on this character. As you can see, the contract is level 69, and we have rolled it with an alchemy orb. The idea here is to increase the item quantity and rarity, so that way we are getting more loot out of the chests. Problem with this is that it does make the heist contract stronger. However, for the most part though, we're decently tanky, so we can face take any damage mods. And in terms of killing the monsters, we're not really too concerned because we're just trying to get in and out and not actually clear the room. And we have enough damage to at least get ourselves through and then protect the rogue who is actually with us. So as we're moving along here, we're kind of opening up whatever chests we find along the way. Skip the jewelry one in this case, just because I didn't want to go through the process of selling whatever came out of there. If you really wanted to be efficient about it, you could do that. That's just an option, essentially. If it was something like currency or divination cards, I would open it, because that's raw currency, and that's what we're trying to get on this character. That's why you'd usually go for like a deception contract or a lockpicking contract, so that we can get those 2 rewards more often. It's weighted towards those. So as we kind of move our way into the final room, we're going to open up the safes. Again, we're just kind of working towards our alert level, getting as high as we can without actually triggering the alarm. Then grabbing the end piece, because we still want the rogue markers from that, and because we're going to be profiting rogue markers, you can actually sell these at the end, but it's just something important to have. So as we're making our way back out, as you can see, our character is pretty tanky, even though, again, we're not even fire res capped. And we're just going to be protecting the rogue on the way out. Got a big squad of enemies waiting at the end. That doesn't matter, we're just going to go and run past them. And this kind of strategy essentially is what we're doing. We're buying these contracts for around a C a piece, low level, doesn't really matter too much. Like in the 60s or so is totally fine. If you can run higher, then cool, but no need. I tried on level 83, and again, it was pretty hard. So I would just stick with the low level ones, and that's it. You can buy these from an NPC, or you can trade for them for 1C a piece. I'm just going to go and deposit our extra stuff into our tab for this project, and I'm going to go over that and what upgrades we need now. Alright, so this is basically just going over what we got from heist and those 10 to 12 contracts roughly. So we got about 20C or so in raw, which is pretty good. We also got a decent amount of divination cards, stacked decks, etc. Most of these divination cards are not really worth anything, except maybe the Shanes that bind, but even then it's a stretch. I'm just throwing them in here to show that, hey, we do get other loot. Got some smaller currencies as well, such as Vol Orbs, Blessed Orbs, Orbs of Scouring, Chromatics, and you could convert these up and sell them to Chaos, but I'm just keeping them in this case because that would take a lot of extra trading, and so I don't want to go through the process of doing all that and etc. because we don't actually need that to upgrade this character. We're only going to need a couple C a piece, even for the rings. If we can get rings for like a C or 2 piece, that'd be awesome. Same thing with the helmet, amulet, you get the point, very, very cheap stuff. Especially for the chest piece, because we want to spend a little more there and get a 6 link, it's better to be more conservative on the other pieces off the bat and just see what you can get. Other things too, like for the skill tree, we're going to be wanting to fill in some jewel sockets, like I have an open jewel socket right here, and that's something we're going to want to be filling in with some mana leech. That'd be fantastic because we still have a mana flask. Speaking of flasks, even just adjusting our flasks, we have 2 quicksilvers, we don't need that. Getting like a granite flask, maybe still keeping our life flask, but maybe getting like an amethyst flask, as our chaos res is currently -60. So in terms of res capping our character, adding some extra utility and even some damage too as we go shopping for some different items, all of this is going to come into play and allow us to enter into our white tier maps. This is essentially just fixing our pseudo broken character, if you will, in that regard, as in it's not very functional, it's not working too well right now, and beginning the journey of getting us into the farther in-game content. So I'm going to jump over to the POB real quick, explain that a little bit, and then go over the upgrades that I purchased, or I'm going to purchase, I should say, with this chaos, and then show the difference between the two. So, see you in a sec. Okay, so this is just going to be taking a look at the POB and seeing where we're at and what we need to upgrade. So as you can see, our res are looking okay. Problem is, endurance charges are checked, which we don't have all the time. We have pretty good uptime for sure, we're a Juggernaut, but it could be better, and we don't want to rely on this to have our res cap, because if we don't have our endurance charge and we get hit by something, we're going to take a lot more damage. So that's step 1, we need to fix our resistance. Step 2, our damage. We're at 26,000 damage. It needs to be like double this to really start feeling comfortable in those white tiers, because we have 12 BoneShatter stacks, which for reference is just you're hitting the enemy and over and you're stacking up damage. But for mobs that you're not doing that, you're going to have lower. If I lower this number, we're dropping even lower and lower, right? So something to think about. Other things as well, like frenzy charges, what we do get from like a blood rage, something like this as we're killing things. I could put that in there because we are mapping with the build, that makes sense. But again, it's a lot of inconsistencies. We need to build up a strong foundation for the build so that way our temporary buffs are kind of just the cherry on top essentially, right? Or the temporary buffs have such high uptime that we count them as close as we can to permanent. Which could be said for the endurance charges, but that's even then a little bit sketchy, because especially in terms of getting hit by endgame bosses, if we don't have those endurance charges, then that could be life or death. However, something that we will do in a future video is count it for the purposes of physical damage reduction, and that is because when we are taking that physical damage reduction, it'll mostly be through like BoneShatter damage, etc., in which case we will have endurance charges because we're stacking it on ourselves, we're taking physical damage. Config is set for our Guardian Pinnacle boss because that's the content we're going to be doing. Not fighting Ubers on this build, right? If we take a look at Uber damage, we are way below. We're dealing like nothing. And that's not the goal. If you want to transition this into a super bosser build, totally. If you want to put more investment, that's not the goal. Again, we're only going to spend hopefully a couple exalts, but we're going to see how it plays out, because maybe we do spend more than that, I don't know. Or less, right? Okay, so things to upgrade. We're going to want Mana Leech first. I want a Lethal Pride here eventually to get some more strength, give some more strength on the nodes. Again, we're going to play strength stacking archetype because it is very cheap to get going, punch through the content, very efficient. Now, we can get special notables, things like additional strength, extra crit chance on these big notables, but that's a random chance though, because it's depending on what kind of timeless jewel you get. A lot of rolling RNG, so we're not really concerned about that. It's more just for the strength. In our next level, we're coming upon another jewel socket essentially up here, which is great. We can put like a Watcher's Eye in here, but off the bat, it's probably just gonna be some life, some damage, just like a rare jewel. Again, very, very cheap stuff. Moving up to a large cluster jewel eventually, we're gonna be transitioning to something like this, giving us leech. It's just added attack damage, giving us some leech, life leech, and mana leech. This is amazing. Helps fix our flask problem, which we're gonna go and buy. Probably some 1 to 2C flasks, maybe roll them ourselves. Mostly it'll just be like a granite flask, maybe a chaos res flask, things like that. For rings, massive life and resist. I really want to stack all of that there. Super important for just being like, hey, this is going to be where the build is covered, and I'm going to put a lot of load on the rings, but that's okay because we don't really need them for anything else at the moment, so I'm fine with doing that. At some point, go and look this up here, Astramentus. This is going to be big. Putting this in, although it doesn't seem to do much on the surface, like our damage increased by a relative decent amount, but with the big keys here that opens up our tree. We have a lot of inefficient points on the tree. Examples. Hard knocks. Additional intelligence. This is just going to be requirements. Saves us an extra point. Versatility. Similar thing. Saves us an extra point. Accuracy. Saves us an extra point. You can see where we're going. We're beginning to free up points and to get our tree more efficient into the things we actually want. So as we get better gear, we're making our tree more efficient. That's fantastic. And obviously coming through here, we're going to get more jewel sockets, which we can fill in later with things. But for now, no real plans besides maybe like a forbidden flesh, forbidden flame, like an unstoppable or something. But we'll have to see. Again, it's pretty flexible. So those are the original things, or the first things, excuse me, that we're going to work on. Then we're going to work on gem levels. If I crank these up to 21, so we have the currency for it, you're going to notice our damage is huge. So gem level is huge, and it is very, very underrated. Even for things like attack, right? Like it is important to level your gems. I mean, what? We increased our damage, but we're at 96,000, and it was at, take a look, 31,000. So triple our damage. That's insane. That's huge for white tier maps. So that's something we're going to work on. We're going to buy level 21 gems? Not necessarily, because that could be expensive. But we're going to look for things like maybe even like a level 20 gem, right? That could totally do a lot of work for us. And there's other things too, like Assassin's Mark, example, something that gives us damage. Even increasing these levels a little bit, give us a little bit more damage. Not much, but it's still there. These little things add up, especially when you have a lot of skill gems. So working on that's going to be huge. So we're going to be working on gem levels, res capping our gear through our rings, which again is going to be awesome. We're going to put a lot of stress on that, but that's okay. Astramentus. And then gloves, if possible. As you can see, these are very poor gloves. Most of this gear was just taken out of act vendors, right? Or I should say all of it, except for the weapon. And then just orb of binding, right? Our chest piece actually rolled pretty decent, but we're going to replace that at some point too. Even something like a vise, right? Excuse me, not a size, a vise. Gives us a lot of strength. If I put in like a Meganord's vise, very cheap, unique, boom, that's an immediate damage increase right there, things like that. So just filling in the character with some cheap uniques or cheap rare gear is super important. And so that's what we're going to do, essentially, is do a short shopping spree. I'm going to post about that in the next video, just because this video is already pretty long, and essentially talk about what we purchased, and then essentially show some white tier mapping gameplay, and then go into some early economics of what we're going to be doing in order to get from white to yellow tier maps. So for now, thank you so much for watching. I know this is a bit of a long video all over the place, but hopefully this gives a general overview of what we're kind of trying to do, and then it'll get a little more specific, hopefully, as we start upgrading parts of the character, and then also as I explain the choices for doing so. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.